Okay, so let's be honest. When you hear the name Job, what's the one word that pops into your head? Patience, right? The patience of Job. But what if I told you that the famous story of the patient sufferer, that's just the frame around a much bigger, wilder, and way more rebellious picture? Today, we're going to peel back the layers of that old myth to find the true, raw, and honestly pretty angry face of Job. Let's get into it.
And we're not the first to see this deeper story. Just listen to the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard. He wasn't looking at some simple bedtime story about being patient. For him, Job was essential. It was food for a soul precisely because it wrestled with the biggest, scariest questions of being human. This quote, it perfectly sets the stage for the journey we're about to take, from a simple folk legend to an absolute philosophical masterpiece.
All right, so here is the key to unlocking the whole thing. You have to realize that the book of Job isn't one smooth, continuous story. Nope. Scholars have shown that it's actually two completely different stories, written centuries apart, that have been skillfully woven together. You've got this ancient, simple folktale that acts as a kind of container, and then bam, right in the middle, you have this revolutionary, explosive, philosophical poem.
And this right here shows you the two completely different faces of Job. Over on one side, in that prose frame, that's the myth. It's the legend we all know, the good guy who gets tested, stays patient, and gets double everything back in the end. But then you look at the poetic core, and it's like a different person entirely. This Job is furious. He demands answers from God. He sees his suffering as an injustice, and he even curses the day he was born. It's the tension between the patient myth and the angry rebel that gives this book its incredible power.
Now what's so cool is that we can actually see how this happened over time. That original folktale about patient Job, it's ancient, maybe floating around since the time of King David. But then, centuries later, probably during the national trauma of the Babylonian exile, some brilliant, daring poet took that old story and dropped a philosophical bomb right in the middle of it. And later on, editors even added more layers, like the speeches from this guy Elihu. The book is literally like an archaeological dig for ideas.
So this whole debate didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Job's big question, why do good people suffer, that wasn't new. It's a cry you can hear echoing across the entire ancient world, in the writings of civilizations that were around long before and alongside ancient Israel.
I mean, just look at this list. From Egypt to Mesopotamia, stories about a righteous sufferer were a whole genre. These other texts explored pain for sure, but they usually ended with a neat, tidy answer like, oh, you must have committed some secret sin. But what makes Job so revolutionary is that it looks at all those easy answers and rejects every single one of them. It focuses only on the pure moral outrage of an innocent person suffering. And it's that incredible rejection of easy answers that leads us to the book's absolutely explosive climax. So after Job has spent chapter after chapter arguing with his friends, shutting down all their simple explanations, he does something unbelievably bold. He calls out God directly. He demands that God himself show up and explain what's going on. I mean, he basically puts God on trial. The tension is just immense.
So this is it, the ultimate question the whole book has been building towards. After all the yelling and the pain and the rebellion, what does God actually say? How is this cosmic legal battle going to end?
And here is the jaw-dropping plot twist. God doesn't give Job an answer. Not a logical one, anyway. There's no explanation, no cosmic reason, no here's why it all happened. Instead, God basically answers Job's questions with a whole bunch of his own questions. He takes Job on this whirlwind tour of a creation that is so wild, so vast, and so deeply mysterious that it just completely shatters our tiny human categories of right and wrong.
First, God points to Behemoth, just this colossal, powerful creature. It's a symbol of the raw, untamable power of nature itself. It's just there. It exists totally outside of human control, it doesn't care about our ideas of justice, but it's still part of God's world.
And then, if that wasn't enough, comes Leviathan, the great chaotic sea monster. This creature represents not just the chaos of the cosmos, but also the terrifying historical powers of the day, like Egypt or Babylon, forces that could crush people and nations without a second thought. And God's point is crystal clear: only I can handle this. Your little human rulebook can't even begin to contain the reality of my creation.
Job's response at the very end, this is the real climax of the whole book. He doesn't say, oh, okay, now I get it, thanks for explaining. He says, I used to know about you from secondhand stories. I heard the rumors, but now my own eyes have seen you. It was never about getting a neat answer. It was about having a direct, terrifying, humbling encounter with a divine reality that is so much bigger than human reason.
So what do we do with this incredibly complex book? what's its lasting legacy? Well, its meaning has been a kind of battleground for centuries, and it has shifted dramatically depending on the era.
This timeline is so fascinating because it shows how Job has been like a mirror for humanity. For centuries, in the Middle Ages, the myth of patient Job was the only story people knew. Then, the Enlightenment came along and rediscovered the rebel Job, the guy demanding justice. And by the 20th century, he was a symbol for the struggle to find meaning in a world that seemed totally absurd. The real, complicated Job, was always there, just waiting under the surface of the legend.
So, what's the real takeaway here? The book isn't a manual on how to be patient. It's a validation of doubt. It teaches us that real, grown-up faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the courage to keep asking the hard questions, to wrestle with God, even when all you get back is silence.
And that really leaves us with a final, massive thought to chew on. The legend of Job, the myth, it gives us a simple, comforting little story. But the reality of Job, the full book, gives us something so much more valuable. It gives us permission to question. It suggests that maybe, just maybe, the highest form of faith isn't having all the answers, but finding the strength to live inside a profound, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying mystery.